Let's talk about dahlia tubers and how easy they can be to grow. Dahlias can be amazingly easy to grow if you don't get overwhelmed by all the information that is out there. So, unfortunately, a lot of that information is actually coming from cut flower farmers, and you don't need to do everything like a cut flower farmer in order to grow dahlias successfully in your garden. So, what is a dahlia tuber? The closest thing you're likely very familiar with is a potato. And like potatoes, dahlias have eyes. So the tuber has an eye. Unique to dahlias, the eye is actually located, or eyes, on the neck of the plant. So when we dig the tubers in the fall, they're on a clump. So we will plant a single tuber, and by the fall, we have all of these tubers. And we're going to look for eyes up near the base of the plant here. This was the stem of the plant when we dug it. And I can divide that up to make separate tubers, but the tuber has to have an eye to grow. And you can see here, these are some that I put in potting soil earlier to take cuttings off of. As a home gardener, this is not a starting process. Planting this is your starting process. But I wanted you to see the green material here where the eyes have come alive, and this is where they start growing from. When we ship tubers, we're looking for them just to come alive enough that we know it has an eye, but it hasn't yet grown into a shoot because this gets easily broken off in shipment. When you buy a tuber, what you should be looking for is one that's firm. It shouldn't be shriveled and it shouldn't be squishy in any way. What doesn't matter about your tuber is the size. So it doesn't matter if it's a little tuber or a giant tuber. And you can see this is a variety called Castle Drive. It tends to make larger tubers. So we will generally ship healthy, larger ones. I could still plant this as long as it has an eye on it and it would still grow. This is Linda's baby. It tends to just make smaller tubers. They're smaller, they're rounder. So some of the dahlias just have a tendency to make different sizes of tubers. But they all grow big, beautiful plants from a single tuber. My first recommendation to those of you new to growing dahlias is start with less expensive tubers. The less expensive tubers aren't less expensive because they're less beautiful. They're actually less expensive because growers like myself grow more of them. I grow plant the most quantities of flowers that do well and sell well at market. And so those are the ones that are actually easier to grow many times, and they're just more plentiful in the market. And that's actually why they're less expensive. It's nothing to do with how beautiful the bloom is. So save yourself the trouble of going out, if you're just starting out, to finding some very unique dahlia, and just go for the ones that are available at your local nursery or from growers like myself and that aren't so expensive. My other quick tip is don't stress about storing your tubers. If you're in some place like I am in Iowa, where it freezes over winter and we can't keep the dahlia tubers in the ground, if you get tired in the fall and you're like, I don't want to try and dig them up and store them, don't. Just leave them in the ground and let them rot. And that is honestly my tip, because I think so many people, that sounds like a lot of work to them. And that's not a reason not to grow them during the summer, because if you think about the cost of a dahlia tuber, the less expensive ones, they're no more than a potted plant you would buy and plant in a container or your bedding plants that you would buy at the nursery. So if that's your reason for not growing them, is you don't want to worry about storing them over winter, don't. Just treat them as an annual in that case. For those of you who do want to try storing them, I'll do a whole nother video on that subject. To plant your dahlia tuber, you're going to dig a hole about 6 inches deep, and I like to add a bit of granular fertilizer. My preference is Espoma Biotone. And I'll put about a tablespoon of that in the hole, and then I'm going to just drop my dahlia tuber in and cover the hole back up. You don't have to spread the granular fertilizer out or do anything special. Just drop, cover the hole. Soil temperature, though, is my number one thing to think about. Soil temperatures need to be at least 60 degrees for your dahlia tuber to do anything. Otherwise, it's just going to sit there. And that's, for us, it's definitely after our last chance of frost. And sometimes it's a week or two after that. So we just have to watch the weather. And you can find, don't go using a thermometer. You can actually Google 4-inch soil temp for your state, and you will probably find a map that shows you what your soil temp is at that given time. If you have stored your dahlias at home over the winter and you're worried about them waking up to know which ones to plant, Don't do anything fancy. Just let them warm up as it warms up outside. Mine are stored in a place that's temperature controlled somewhat. We let it warm up as the spring gets warmer, but it is well insulated so the temperatures don't fluctuate as much as they do, say, outside. So as it warms up, you'll see that eye come alive naturally that way. Don't try to put them in a plastic bag or do anything strange because you just take a risk of them rotting or something. What do you need to do to your plants during the season to keep them healthy? Well, the first one's water. So if you get less than an inch of rain that week, make sure you give them some water. And then up, you want the equivalent about that 1 inch of rain. So you could give them a soak like twice a week, maybe during hot periods. Um, when it is like 95 out, I actually have found the more water, the better. Here in Iowa, July and August are typically hot and dry. Last year we had an unseasonably wet July, and the dahlia plants actually loved it. It was hard on the blooms because they were so soaking wet, but the plants themselves were really happy. So the more water you can deliver to the base of that plant, the better. And dahlias aren't too picky about overhead watering, or they don't have to be on drip irrigation. Don't think you need a fancy system. Just if you only have a couple plants, you can water them with a watering can. There's no worry about how you're going to do it. The other thing that I do as a flower farmer is I foliar feed the plant during the season. You don't need to do that. You could do the same basics, but just give it a liquid feed with some basic plant fertilizer. Now, I would say stick to a really basic fertilizer. Um, this is my preference. This is a fish and seaweed fertilizer. It smells terrible, works great. And this is a 2-3-1. So this is, it's not super strong. It's pretty balanced, and it's going to keep both your flowers going as well as keep your tubers healthy at the end of the season. There are ways to fertilize in a way that would push more flowers, but it's hard on the tubers in the end. So stick with the balanced fertilizer and you will be great. And again, if you put that granular fertilizer in when you planted it, this is optional to fertilize during the season. It's just going to give you more blooms and keep your plant a little healthier during the season. The other thing I do add when I feed my plant is molasses. This is kind of my secret sauce, but I add a tablespoon of this to about a gallon of water when we're foliar feeding. And you can also do that as a liquid feed at the base of the plant. I am not going to get into the details of all the theories of why this works, but it helps both with insects wanting to eat the flowers as well as just keeps the plant generally healthy. And it's going to deliver some micronutrients basically. And you'll see discussions about how it raises Brix numbers. That's the sugar in the plant to deter insects eating on them. There's not a lot of scientific evidence to that, but there are a lot of people who are swearing by this, and I have used it for the last several seasons and agree that it definitely helps us cut down on the amount of flowers that get eaten by insects. I will say, if you're starting out and you're worried about insects, maybe you have a lot of Japanese beetle pressure or something, plant darker colored dahlias. For some reason, insects just really love the light colored ones, and they tend to go toward those. And the last thing you're probably going to need to do is, if you're growing dahlias for cut flowers, they tend to be taller varieties. You're going to need something to stake them with. And my preferred staking method in a garden bed is just a piece of, you could buy a green garden stake at any hardware store. I like these random pieces of rebar that I have around. This one's about 4 feet tall. Doesn't need to be any taller than that. Even if your dahlia gets 5.5 feet, doesn't matter. We're going to push this in the ground about as far as we can, 9-12 inches. And then you're going to tie it off. You're going to use a piece of twine. You're going to put this next to the plant, tie the plant off about a foot out of the ground. And that lowest high where this is coming out of the ground is the important one, because that's going to secure the base of the plant from moving. So that's our important one. And then if you need it later in the season, you just put a second tie further up. But the important one is the one toward the bottom of the plant. That's actually the one that keeps it steady. I think people think this is the important one. It's not. Keep the one down toward the bottom. That's going to keep the whole branch of the dahlia from breaking off on you. If your dahlia plants do start looking sad for some reason, either the leaves are getting discolored or they look wilty, or you just generally think you have a problem but you don't know what it is, Don't panic. Give them a healthy dose of fertilizer and with a good watering, and wait a couple weeks for it to work itself out. There's some strange things that happen in the garden sometimes that will work themselves out. Sometimes we get soft-bodied insects like aphids or thrips at one point in the season, but because we have other plants nearby, we actually have beneficial insects that happen to move in about the same time, and those problems work themselves out. So before you get panicked and start posting pictures to some random forum about what's wrong with my dahlia, just give them a healthy dose of fertilizer and make sure they're watered and see if they work themselves out of it. I hope that's some really helpful basics if you've been intimidated to grow dahlias. Please don't. You're going to have a gorgeous garden if you try them out. And I think, the lucky people are the ones who walked in the garden center and thought, oh, dahlia, I should try that, and saw nothing before on information out there and just read the planting instructions off the package. So we want you to be that successful and have fun with them. And I will do a separate video sometime about storing dahlias for those of you who want to try storing them over winter.